My name is Jenny Parks, and I am the Vice President for Policy and Research at MEC. I am so excited that you are all here and that I'm meeting some of you. Actually, there are more of you here whom I've never met in person than there are people with whom I've actually had a face-to-face conversation in the past. So it's pretty exciting. I really do appreciate it. And of course, everyone who is here virtually too, thank you. I understand that we're in that era where we come any way we can, and we're happy to have all of you. So thank you. I know Sarah has just shared with you how to get access to the wireless internet. And I'm hoping that if you're having any problems, let us know. There's a very nice lady sitting at the desk just outside that door who can help you too. So, but Annika and Rohit in the back there can help you as well. So they are our lovely consultants from EdBridge Consultants who've been helping us with this project now for a couple of years. So we have a lot of great people here. I'm eager for you to meet all of them, but we don't want to take up too much time with introductions. And a lot of you have probably already met each other on the calls that we've had. So we're not going to do a round robin, but bit by bit, you will be able to meet and greet everyone. So we want you to, now I will, full disclosure here, I have bifocal contacts for the first time in my life. And they're relatively new. And so I thought that the notes that I printed were easily accessible to my eyes. And so if you see me kind of negotiating this during this time, please forgive and please understand. I want to encourage you to make this a conversational meeting. Raise your hand, jump in. We are here to collaborate and learn from each other and to enjoy each other's successes and be inspired by them. So please, let's not be too formal. Blake asked me this morning, should I wear a tie? And I said, well, I'm not, so you don't need to. In fact, I don't think we have any ties. So everyone got the right vibe. That's great. Also, if you are joining us virtually, we please ask that you mute your mics unless you are the person, unless you are actually speaking. It does eliminate the background noise. But also, if you can't hear anything or see anything, do let us know. Once again, Rohit will be monitoring the online portion of the meeting. He's very good at it and very responsive. So we want you to feel as much like you are here as possible. If you are online, we encourage you to use the raise hand feature if that's how you would like to get some attention. So I will start with a few overarching comments about this work. It started about 3 years ago. Actually, Credential Engine work has been going on for a long time, and credential work in each of the states has been going on for a long time. But it took a little while till Credential Engine and MEC kind of joined hands and moved forward. And then with the help and the underwriting of the Ascendium Foundation, we have one of their representatives here today whom you'll hear from in a few minutes. We were able to do a lot more than we had in the past. Ken Sauer has always been the champion of this work, so I credit much of the energy and the initiative to him. So thank you, Ken. We'll be hearing more from Ken later today too. You'll be able to hear about all the great stuff going on in Indiana. This is really a time for us to celebrate what we've already accomplished and then to look toward the future. We have so many things that that people have done that we never thought could have been accomplished in this amount of time. And again, so many things that really inspire us and let us know that there's much more important work to be done and that can be done. One of the things that Blake and I were talking about is some of it's just figuring out the strategies, figuring out how other people did it. And I always say, and Susan and I talk about this all the time, there's nothing better to motivate a state than telling them what their neighbor state did. You know, with Wisconsin, it's Minnesota. Well, you know, in Minnesota, they did this. And so the Wisconsin people are like, gotta do that. Kansas and Nebraska, or Iowa and Nebraska, you know, we have these friendly rivalries. But I have to say, in working with folks across the nation, they are truly, genuinely friendly rivalries in the Midwest. It's one of the things I love about working in the Midwest. So there's a goofball there, but they are. I've worked with a number of national initiatives, especially with our sister compacts. And I have to say, there's a different flavor to it in the Midwest, and I really enjoy it. We really do delight in each other's successes, and we are inspired by them. So you guys are a testament to that in the work you're doing here. So There are a number of other things I could say, but I want to make sure that we have time to hear from the folks who are waiting to speak to us and who can tell us a lot more about MHEC, about Credential Engine, and about credential transparency. So the first person I will introduce is Susan Heegard. She is the president of MHEC. She's been there almost 4 years now, and she is joining us virtually. Now, do I need to do something?
No, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi,
Great.
Susan.
How's the volume?
Great.
I've never been accused of being too quiet. Hey, everybody. I'm Susan Heegard. I'm the president of the Midwestern Higher Education Compact and MHEC. And I've got some notes here, so I'll be looking down periodically, but I'm really sorry not to be with you in person. I had planned on it until just a couple days ago, but some stuff going on in our family just required me to be close to home. And so I'm live from our living room in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I live. I'm just going to warn you, there may be brief barking in the background if the mailman comes. So just heads up on that one. But thank you for taking the time to join us for this important gathering, and more importantly, for being part of this work to better identify, understand, and develop credentials and pathways. We have done this work. Others have been there before us, but this is fairly new for the compact. And so we're just pleased that we've partnered with Credential Engine and also to have had the generous support of Ascendium. Carolyn Lee has been by our side, supportive and critical friend. And Carolyn, you took a chance with us, as many funders do, and we really appreciate that. Thank you. I wanted to also thank our staff, Sarah Pell, Jenny Parks, Katie Chalk, Deb Kidwell. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. Ed Bridge, of course, and then Ken Sauer. You brought it to us, as you do with many initiatives, and we're grateful to you and your never-ending enthusiasm and energy. Thanks to the team at Credential Engine for helping us as an organization and region move forward to make this work possible and useful, better and better understood. One of my mottos is explore, try stuff, experiment. Don't make the same mistake. Don't make the same mistake twice. Just make a new one. So I'm going to try to be brief here, but this is a big issue across the country. I was at Lumina Foundation, had their policy partner convening last week or week before last, and this was a topic that was high on the agenda. And so there was a panel discussion on short-term credentials, but I think really it's something that some people understand well, most people don't. And we're all trying to figure it out, I think, together. So just to highlight some of the accomplishments of the MCTA, I'll just use that acronym a couple of times, but attendance at our quarterly meetings and pathway action team meetings has grown over time, with over 200 individuals engaging in this initiative since it launched in spring 2021. We believe this growth can be attributed to multiple factors, including increased demand on the ground, of course, from students, institutions, and employers for credential understanding, application, and transparency. So transparency is important, but it's not the only thing that's important, right? The relative newness of some of the practices, so there's a lot of demand. The relevance of the initiative's produced resources, and the relative lack of a national sort of professional association focused on these issues. You know, we know that there's an association for almost everything, but there's still, we still sort of lack a cohesive way to pull together on these issues. So there's a need for more collaborative, collective ways in which we can jointly work together, sharing our resources and knowledge across the Midwest and across the country. Our collaboration on pathways work has led us to useful resources, such as our Pathways Action Team Brief. Oh, something just went in the middle of my screen, sorry. Why is that doing that? A team brief, the state roadmap and action guide with the companion self-level self-assessment, and all of the presentations and resources shared by our partners over the past year and a half. The Midwest states, all while approaching this work from different angles and perspectives, are making tremendous progress. For example, and I'm sure I'm going to forget some things here, but I want to just highlight that Kansas has published all of their public institution secondary rewards to the registry. Bismarck State College has published stackable credentials for cybersecurity. We know that's a huge issue in North Dakota. The chancellor, you can't talk to the chancellor there without him mentioning cybersecurity, right? Indiana's published all certificate and degree programs offered by Indiana public colleges and universities, almost 3,000 in total, and are actively working on adding all private, nonprofit, private, for-profit, and non-traditional providers as well. Overall, we've learned that there's huge value in gathering, organizing, and sharing what works in each of the states with others in the region, and developing opportunities wherever possible to provide test cases and examples that other states can use for the basis of their own initiatives. As Jenny said, there's no better way to learn or get inspired to learn than a little competition from next door. Well, we've learned so much. We still have much work before us, and I hope that you have a productive and fun meeting, and I look forward to learning about what's next. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. It's always great to hear from you, and we're sorry that you can't be here, but we are enjoying you being here with us virtually. So thank you. Let's go on then next to our next speaker. I'm going to introduce Scott Cheney. He is, are you the president or the CEO, executive director? You're all of the above, Scott.
What do you want me to be today? I'll be whatever you want.
Head honcho. You are,
Okay.
you're the big cheese. I mean, I do live in Wisconsin, so we have to make a reference to cheese.
Very small cheese, very small cheese.
Cheese. Well, whatever it is, cheese related or not, Scott is at the head and the vanguard with Credential Engine and Credential Transparency. And I remember our first meeting, I was so delighted. He was worried that it was going to be very uptight and stodgy, and it couldn't have been anything further from that. It was very pleasant. So Scott, would you like to share some remarks with us, please?
Sure. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate the fact that you all have gathered today. Like Susan, I'm sorry I couldn't be with you, but no, it's going to be a good conversation. I just want to extend my thanks on top of Susan's, both to MEC and to Susan's leadership and the entire team there for being such great partners, to Carolyn and Ascendium for backing this work and recognizing the value of all of this, and to every one of you who's there in person or online, and to others who've not been able to join yet. This really is all about the work you're doing. We're thrilled that you have joined on and that you have partaken in this effort, that you recognize the value of having better information for your students, your employers, your educators, and everyone else throughout your state and throughout the Midwest region. So it's been a real joy being able to do this just with you all. I want to just take a second and give you a little bit of broader perspective on this work. You know, we've been at this at Credential Engine now for, well, officially, it'll be 5 years in December when we celebrate our 5th anniversary. But the work has been underway a little bit longer than that. And in a very short amount of time, there has just been a tremendous growth in awareness of what's possible and in backing and interest among foundations, among Congress, among federal agencies, among employer groups, with how transparency and open data can be a resource in our modern economy. And I just want to make sure that some of you, like Ken and Blake, have been with us from the very beginning. Some of you have been newer to this, but it's the collective effort that is drawing the attention and making this possible. So I was hoping by today I was going to be able to announce that we officially are working with half of the states in the country. Not surprisingly, some state contracting issues have prevented me from being able to say that officially today. But by the end of the year, we actually would be closer to 30 states than not, and are really excited about the growth in the interest among state leadership in picking up this work. The numbers that get cited oftentimes are the credential numbers, and the fact that we've still got about 1 million credentials out there in the United States, and a focus on how many credentials have successfully been published. And thanks to Ohio, and thanks to Indiana, and thanks to Bismarck State and Blake, we've got now about 42,000 credentials from nearly 2,000 organizations that have been published using open data and made accessible to anyone, anytime, anywhere in a common format. But just as importantly as that kind of top line number is the richness of the information that's coming in and that we're able to provide to the field. So there are now about 1,000 competency frameworks that have been published that let you understand the competencies that are associated with those credentials, and then the competencies that can be linked off to employer skill requirements on the job, and being able to make that direct connection between what's offered and what's needed out there. There's about 10,000 learning opportunities that have been made available through this work. Nearly 6,000 outcome data points about these credentials that just give that a richer additional information about the value of these credentials. And then 600 assessments have been published, a growing number of transfer values, pathways are just beginning to come. Illinois was the first state that actually just published their eligible training provider list as a collection on the registry so they can help manage their ETPL. And we're seeing more states that are going to be doing that soon. So it's the totality of the number of states, the richness of information that is beginning to drive interest in richer pathway applications, in learning and employment records. So that the National Governors Association is promoting learning and employment records across the states. We're going to be working with a number of those states, all of them that actually put their application in to get some money to roll out learning and employment records, are partners with Credential Engine and are using open data and are seeing the value of building that into their LERs. So we're really excited about the recognition of how you pick this work up and extend it into lots of different projects and lots of different initiatives. And then just, a kind of final thought about the collective impact of all of your work and all of our other states is the interest around policy. We have a number of states that have passed legislation or put in place an executive order, written into agency guidelines, the need for open data and the requirement around transparency. We're also seeing that increasingly at the federal level, at Department of Labor, Department of Education, Department of Defense. Office of Personnel Management is very interested in doing something across the government with all of this. And there are 2 senators now who are interested in introducing legislation that would support the state's ability to do this kind of work. And so from the very front line of a community college and a high school and a university to the agencies, to state leadership, to federal leadership, you've really been a part of moving this entire ball forward. And it's your collective work that I think has helped get a lot of attention. So I want to thank you. I know the entire staff wants to thank you. Everybody who's been helping to build this and move this forward really owes a debt of gratitude to your work. So anything we can do, please let us know. It's been a real joy working with Susan and the team on this. And thank you all for gathering today and tomorrow to continue the work.
Thank you, Scott. Well, I thought I would share a few of the numbers that are in my notes now that I have been able to look at them appropriately and actually see them. Because you're right, Scott, it is not just the numbers and it's not just those ending numbers. It is all the little pieces that add up, and some of the numbers we didn't expect that we would have, right? That we didn't even know would become a thing. But I will say that we have about 200 members of the MCTA, which is, I think, a great accomplishment. We also have 4 goals, and I don't know how many of you have revisited those since the beginning of all this. So I was going to share those briefly before we then hear from Carolyn, because these were the goals that she helped us develop at the beginning of the grant and that we have been making progress toward the whole time. Goal number 1 has been to network. And I think we can say that that's been very successful. It's what MEC does best, and that's what we're going to continue to do. We also wanted to create new resources, and we've created some webinars, some reports, and hope to be issuing more guidance and maybe even potentially a blog at some point. Goal number 3 was to form action teams, which we all know we have. We've had quite a few of them that have been very successful. One that particularly comes to mind is Pathways. And we were going to advance the dissemination of information related to credential transparency and to celebrate our accomplishments once again, as we are doing today. So with those little numbers in mind, important numbers, albeit small ones, I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn Lee, who is joining us here from Ascendium Foundation.
Hi all, such a pleasure to be with you today. Just want to acknowledge that I'll be probably masked most of the time because I'm getting over a bit of a head cold, and we all know these days there's no reason to be passing our germs around. So forgive my lack of face-to-face time with you all, but so pleased to be with you today. And I'd like to begin today by acknowledging and celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day and offering my gratitude for the past and present stewards of the land on which we're gathered today, who include the Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, Ho-Chunk, Kickapoo, and Sioux nations. As mentioned, my name is Carolyn, and I have the privilege of serving as a senior program officer at Ascendium Education Group. If you don't know much about Ascendium, our education philanthropy is focused on elevating socioeconomic opportunity for learners from low-income backgrounds, particularly through post-secondary education and workforce training. I work with a portfolio of funded projects intended to streamline key learner transitions. And we are particularly interested in transitions between post-secondary education and the workforce, and creating new opportunities to move smoothly between work and educational opportunities and back again. The fact is, most people, myself included, except for the fact that I have this job, have little idea about the nuts and bolts of what it is we're going to be talking about for the next 2 days, as was alluded to earlier. What we do know is that in order to get and keep a good job throughout our lives that provides a stable future for our family, we may need training, education, retraining, more education. Folks often have limited access to reliable information about what training or credentials they really need. They rely on their employers or their family or neighbors or sometimes an advisor of some kind to steer them in the right direction. There are simply many pathways to keep track of, many options, and not enough maps. Alternatively, there may be only one known route, no visibility to clearer, more direct paths. And I think that's where the Midwest Credential Transparency Alliance comes in. I think of the MCTA actually as a cartography initiative. All of you collectively are working to make more sense of the landscape of credentials. And this is vital, sometimes truly life-saving information. And people need better, clearer access to it at the right time. At the highest level, the goal of MCTA is a clearer path and a smoother way. So I'm extremely excited about the partnerships, the shared vision, and the sustainable alliance that's been built over these last 2 years, and almost completely virtually, which is no small feat. I want to credit the Midwestern Higher Education Compact and Credential Engine, along with their partners at EdBridge, for stewarding this work so capably and steadily over the past 2 unsteady years. And I want to credit all of you for hanging in there because you believe in the importance of this work. This sort of work, publishing credentials to registries, is pretty far removed from direct service to learners or workers. I mean, this is something we talk about in my field a lot. In philanthropy, we're many steps removed from the learners that we ultimately hope to serve. But that doesn't mean that this work isn't meaningful or urgent. In fact, perhaps it's more urgent because until the infrastructure is in place and the agreements are signed and the data is shared and the processes are documented, the learners are no closer to that clear map that they so desperately need. And so the many small steps add up to meaningful progress. And I think you should all be very proud of your progress. So I simply want to challenge the group today to keep your eyes on the goal. When spreadsheets and MOUs and approvals and uploads all start to feel a little bit wonky, remember why the Midwestern Credential Transparency Alliance exists and what you are doing together. You can dramatically shift the opportunities available to people by making this information more accessible and consistently available. There's still, of course, lots to do, lots of things that need to happen for these maps to be ready, but I think you're charting the course. And I hope that you not only feel proud of how far you've come, but are ready to keep pushing until the promise of MCTA is realized. And again, thank you for being an example for the whole country about how to do this work regionally and collaboratively with a shared vision. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Carolyn. That is wonderful. I love the analogy of this being a cartography endeavor. Many of you know that I started my education career as a high school social studies and history teacher. And I do think about, I used to teach a little lesson on the power of maps, not just because of the things it allows people to do, but it's the things it allows people to think. If you've ever taken a geography class where it's very map intensive, you can look at different projections of a world map. And if you've ever seen an Australian map where they're not at the bottom, or if you've seen a Peters projection where Greenland actually isn't larger than Canada, when you look at those things, it does change the way you think about the world. One of the important things that we studied at the beginning of that unit, and this does pertain, I promise. Those of you know, I grew up in the South, and so I'm a bit of a wandering storyteller, but this is on point. One of the first things I did is I had the students draw a map of their neighborhood. And then I had them draw a map of the world. And then I showed them some data that had just come out. I taught near Madison, Wisconsin at the time, and some studies had just come out there from the geography department, where they've been studying the world conception of children from different backgrounds. So they might have been children who were deeply in urban poverty or rural poverty, or were maybe wealthier children in a suburban environment, and from all different countries. And one of the things that really became very clear and was quite poignant was that the world is much smaller when you're poorer, when you don't have resources, when you don't have information, when you don't get to travel. Your ability to envision the world, and therefore your role in it and your opportunity in it, is much more constricted. So I do love the map analogy, and I see this as very apropos. The more we can provide those paths, the more we can create those maps and give people a vision of the possible. I just, you all know I'm a gushy true believer. That's why I work in education. So I'm very moved and privileged to be part of this work. So moving on, we are a little bit ahead of our schedule. Let me cover a few of our logistics before I introduce our keynote speaker. So, and again, I am not in control of the slides, which is probably a good thing, but we will be having our keynote speaker soon. But before I introduce Blake Flanders, I will give you a few little updates here. First of all, the restrooms. You go out this door, down the hallway, and take a right. Those are always important things to know. They're past the elevators. If you want to unload your coat, there's a coat room on the way there too. I'm also going to review briefly with you our agenda for the next few days. I'm assuming everyone has got a piece of that paper and can see it online. But we will be hearing from Dr. Flanders from 2 to 3. We'll have a break from 3 to 3:15, and then we'll have some concurrent sessions, and they will be in rooms 246 and 245. We will reconvene after a break then at 4:15, and we're going to hear some of the projects that had received some of the mini grants that came as part of this work. And I looked at some of that information this morning, and that's pretty darn exciting. Now, mind you, I am a data nerd, so, but I think you'll all find it exciting as well. Then we're going to hear a little bit from Ken Sauer, who again is our thought leader here in so much of this work. And then we will have a recess at 5:15. We will meet again at 6 p.m. in the lobby of the Aloft, and we'll walk over to our dinner at Joe's Live. And we will enjoy ourselves there and get to know each other more and just hear about all of the great things that bring you to this work. I'll then remind you that tomorrow morning, we will have breakfast here in the Big Ten Center at 8 o'clock. And we will, I'll review tomorrow's agenda at that time. So any questions about all that? All right, well, we have as our keynote speaker today, Dr. Blake Flanders, who is the president and CEO of the Kansas Board of Regents and has been a MEC commissioner since 2014. For those of you who are not as familiar with what a MEC commissioner is, I think there are probably some MEC commissioners who aren't that clear on it, but MEC is, of course, our members are our states. We have 12 states, and there are 5 people from each of those states who become commissioners that comprise our 60-member commission. I think we have 3 commissioners here today. Yes. Usually that commissioner is someone in charge of higher ed in the state, usually in charge of higher ed or the lead on higher ed in the state Senate, the state House of Reps, with the exception of Nebraska, which is unicameral. I always have to mention that as former social studies teacher. And then it's someone else, maybe a governor's appointee, sometimes someone who's prominent in the business and employer community. It's a wide range of folks. Anyway, so they bring this diversity of ideas and experiences to help advise us on, well, what do we need to do? How do we make higher ed in the Midwest better? How do we expand opportunity and improve the quality? And so Blake has been one of those now. And so he also does a lot of other things. I found out he had a credential I didn't know existed, a master's degree in animal science. How cool is that? I'm assuming, well, you can tell us what that is. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds interesting and very important. So without further delay, I will introduce Blake Flanders.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Carolyn, for all your support. And is there a way I can move this? Just, I'm afraid. Thank you, Susan Heegard and Mac for putting this together, and also to Scott Cheney. I've known Scott Cheney for a number of years, worked together on Workforce Investment Act legislation, and appreciate all his work with Credential Engine. So I thought about just talking a little bit about credentials and why credentials, why are we really here, and what's the Kansas story? How have we scaled credentials? That's really what I want to talk to you about. And it's really pretty easy to see how to do it. What's hard is actually doing it. But it's a real easy story to tell on how you can scale credentials. And so why are we so fixated on credentials? It's essentially because it's business driven. It's employer driven. We really wouldn't be here if it were anything else. Credentials right now are employer driven. I thought about why we've had them in occupations for a number of years where the stakes are a little higher, the skills more important. Our skills for our jobs are increasing and have been for a number of years. I thought about, I had a little generator. You ever seen these little generators you use at tailgates? Don't leave fuel in them. So if you go from one football season to the next one and take it out, it won't run, right? So what did I do? this is pretty low skill, right? I said, I'll fix it. So I looked at it had a carburetor that was just pretty simple. And I couldn't get the carburetor off because it's so jammed in there. So I just dumped all the fuel out, went and got this little product called Mechanic in a Bottle. Poured it in, bled it through the carburetor, waited the 4 hours, bled it all the way through, dumped it out, put new fuel in, and it ran. Why was I able to do that? I had no credential. I'm not very mechanical, actually. Born and raised on a farm, but not very mechanical. Well, because it was low stakes and relatively low skill. Would I have done that to the Toyota Avalon in the, no way. So that's how the skill set has improved. We also think about nursing as an example. The nurses have had it all over, and healthcare generally, all over the rest of us in terms of credentials and credentials of value and being able to organize those credentials. Because it's important they have an organization that watches those credentials. You have to go back in to get recertified. You don't just get the credential and then it's a lifelong thing. But why? But that's not how it started. Generally, we had hospitals. Nurses were just in the hospital watching patients. The hospital did some training. It's kind of high stakes when you're in the hospital. Mistakes matter. So over time, I think the hospital said, maybe we ought to write down all the skills that this nurse needs, and then over time that got outsourced to educational institutions. Sometimes now it's coming back in and hospitals are doing the training, but the credential's the same. You have to pass the NCLEX in order to work. Why? Because with credentials, we know exactly what you can do and what skills you have. I think credentials are great for higher ed, and some wouldn't say that. In Kansas, our Board of Regents, we govern the 6 state universities. We coordinate 19 community colleges and 6 technical colleges. We're also responsible for the high school equivalency, or some would say the GED. So why do I think it's important for higher ed and for what I call the modern higher ed student? What's the modern student look like? The modern student, if we're going to add to higher ed, is going to be first generation. What I mean by that is their parents didn't graduate from college. Might have attended just some, but did not graduate from college. And generally, if we're going to add students, and many people in many institutions in higher ed are interested in adding to enrollments, if we're going to add students, they're going to come from minority, first generation backgrounds. That's just going to happen. Why aren't they attending now? Well, our system's not set up to do that. And our system really wasn't set up to serve first generation students, particularly first generation students who have poverty. Was not set up. So how do we, well, number one, what's it mean to me if I say someone has a degree? What's that mean generally? I think we would say that generally means a baccalaureate degree. When we say, do they have a degree? We mean they have a baccalaureate degree. What we really have, even though we've added community colleges, and generally they've been a 2+2, generally in higher ed, what we have is an all or nothing system. You either get a baccalaureate degree or you've got some college with debt and no credential. And oh, by the way, if you don't have a credential, your credits start aging the minute you drop out. If that degree program changes at the university and you don't have the credential, all of a sudden now you have to go back and retake a number of courses. Once you have the award, permanent, it's all fine. You can articulate back in generally. So it is, to me, it's going to be really important. So the dialogue we have around higher ed is, so why aren't more first generation students attending? Why aren't they? And we show, you've all heard this, make $1 million more if you have a baccalaureate degree, right? That's almost always true, right? You're going to, you know, if you look at the median income. So we say, I just cannot believe, aren't these people, I mean, they just don't get it. Here's what we do. They don't want to buy it. I can't believe it. We don't really want to change it. We just want to just talk really about why aren't they buying it? Okay. Well, I just read something this summer that really kind of struck. I was kind of wondering, why aren't they buying it? It's $1 million. You know? That's so far in the future. So I read a piece that this group had done some research on, and they said, yes, but the risk is too great when you have a 50% chance of dropping out. So it's a little bit like buying a ticket and saying, you know, it might come in, but there is a chance it's going to get mighty expensive. You're going to take out quite a bit of debt, and you're going to have half a chance that you don't finish. And if you're first generation, it's probably higher because you don't have those supports. So I think credentials can really help higher ed as well, because if they're stackable, it's a way to continue to work toward perhaps that baccalaureate degree as you move forward, yet still having marketable skills that are documented once you leave. Now in Kansas, here's our landscape workforce-wise. I had a secretary in one of the agencies said, we've got to hire some people. And I went to this region in Kansas, and it was in corrections. And they said, you know, how many people, I'll look at the unemployment, how many people are unemployed in this 7-county region? And that's who I'll contact first. There were 10 people. Yet our workforce participation is dropping. I think a number that we always look at the unemployment rate, look at the workforce participation rate. So people have dropped out of the workforce. We have fewer workers than pre-pandemic. Our workforces are shrinking. We also have a number of individuals in Kansas that don't have any high school credentials, about 150,000. If you look at our wage data by academic award, if you do not have a high school diploma, you really have not much chance in this economy. You really don't. And you actually need more than a high school diploma to really engage. So I think if we're to address the challenges in higher ed and also with our workforce, we're going to have to look at a different way of doing things. Sometimes we talk so much, particularly for first generation students, we talk a lot about access. I have to tell you, access can be an incredibly empty promise. It's an empty promise because students with access that generate student loan debt without a credential at the end, are you better off than if you didn't even go at all? Sometimes I wonder. Now, I know that some college is okay too, but it's not the same as getting the credential. So I think we need to talk about access and success in the same sentence. And I think shorter term credentials can really help us. Because right now, what happens, business wants credentials, those high-end, those larger companies, more sophisticated HR departments, they know about credential. You hear it all the time about Google and some of the larger companies moving that way. But for small business, many times, they've treated the baccalaureate degree as a credential, kind of a proxy, certain set of skills, because the HR departments aren't sophisticated. It might be 1 or 2 people. How many times do you see a job listed that says baccalaureate required and you go, really, it doesn't require a baccalaureate? Okay, but it is a proxy, and we do need, and we're not going to change all the HR departments across the country. So we do need to offer clear pathways for people to get into those types of jobs. I believe the credential, the industry recognized credentials are incredibly important, but so are the academic awards. So 2004, I started in a position in Kansas as with the Department of Commerce and Board of Regents. It was actually a joint position. And what I did is we would help companies with training agreements. And they were pretty large, like multi-million-dollar training agreements. So many of them were with aviation, large companies. And I'd been in education, you know, and I'd always thought about, you know, the educational pathways. As I talked to these business leaders, what they were interested in is what people knew and what they could do. And how do we have a credential? How do we have an award that tells me that? Okay. So what I discovered is we were leveraging our community college system, primarily, sometimes the university system, to provide this training and education. And we would all say in education, oh, we've been doing it for years. We barely need Credential Engine, like we're the experts in this. But here's what I discovered. This was, you know, 2004, really hasn't changed a lot in many states, okay? I learned that the community college, sometimes the university, could do that kind of work, but it was generally in this wing of the college that was customized training. Okay, is anybody aware of that? The customized training wing. What I found out really quickly is customized training wing was much more nimble than the academy portion, okay? And they were really plugged into the needs of business. And their budget was zero. They had no state resource and no legacy resource. So the legacy funding to the institutions to support credentials was not there. And if we really dug into how much customized training was going on, it was mostly with institutions who were located in larger metro areas. So if you were a student at a rural institution, you really had no access to credentials. And that institution was doing very little customized training because the businesses just were not at scale, okay? And I looked across and thought, you know, so I was thinking about all these training agreements with these large companies, how good the jobs were that our students could get if they could get into that company. I really wasn't thinking about first generation students as much at that time. It's just that we could really get a pipeline to recruit more business. And so I thought, how are we going to support credentialing with the legacy funding? That's the key. And people will tell you, oh, it's not about the funding. Well, it can be. You're not going to be able to scale without the appropriate funding. So I wrote a little paper on it, presented that, and it's called, and the legislature looked at that, and they formed a commission, and they were mainly looking at career and technical education, because that's where they thought most of the credentials were. Now we see badges coming that are even post-baccalaureate and those type of things. But at that time, they were looking at more of those career and tech credentials. They formed a commission, then they formed a statewide group that was just going to be over technical education. And these were mostly business leaders on that group, statewide. And they said, we want credentials, and our system was chaos. So I've done it before. I've made up credentials in my office as a faculty member. We're going to package 3 computer classes together and call the person a network specialist, right? I mean, anyone in education has done this before. And it's a great marketing thing. So what you're really trying to do is to get that student who's taking one course to take course 2 and 3, okay? To me, credentials without industry validation are less than we need. That's why I appreciate Scott's work with credential transparency, not business, industry. So we joined a fledgling organization called the National Coalition of Certification Centers, and they worked, NC3 is what they're called, some of you may have heard of them. They worked with Train, T-R-A-N-E, the really a digital company now, but HVAC company, and Snap-on, and we're developing credentials with industry, not just a single business, but the entire industry. I think it's very important. And I'll talk about a little more about them later. And then what we did is we said, we're going to look at our programs, and they kind of need to be producing. If you hire a welder from X community college as a business owner, and then you hire one from Y community college, you kind of need to know what you're buying. Okay. We had programs. One college had a program that was 18 credit hours and they produced a welder. One college had a program that was almost 2 years and produced a welder. They were called the same thing. So, and business, when they would hire, would say, well, those, you know, from that college, they're not good. Well, it was a whole different product. We just called them all the same thing. So we needed some organization around there. So here's what we did. And this was not without effort. We said, we're going to get some statewide advisory committees. Okay, statewide industry. The institution said, and here's the deal, with change, there's going to be a little pushback, right? You're not going to change these systems without a little pushback. The pushback was, we already have advisory committees. Carl D. Perkins Act requires advisory committees for all technical education programs. Well, some of those are very good, and some of those get together. They have to meet twice a year. Some of them get together to eat a sandwich and hear an instructor report out. They really do. Go look at the minutes, just being honest. So we got statewide committees, and they said, we're going to identify credentials that align with the academic award. So we initially went in, thought, if you get a 1-year certificate in this technical area, you'll also get a credential. Well, what we found out is there's credentials that are shorter, some are a little longer. And so we started breaking down our programs and aligning the individual certificates with a credential. So in other words, we do it in nursing, we have forever. You get an associate degree in nursing, and then what do you get? The RN. You pass the NCLEX, you get the RN. So we did it in welding. You passed a certain certificate award at the academic institution, you maybe were an AWS level 1, and here's what that meant. And if you continued your education and maybe you got the certificate B, we don't have we haven't cornered the market on nomenclature, but certificate A, B, and C, and B was a little longer, maybe you were an AWS level 2. And here's what that meant. Certain position welds, everybody could see exactly what that means. So you not only had the academic award, the credit hours, but you also had to have the credential. And then if you went ahead and got an associate degree, it was the highest credential, okay? And we walked through and started doing that kind of rock fighting for every program. And what that did is then it embedded credentials into that infrastructure. And they got the support of the legacy funding. And I will tell you what that spawned. So I've saved some of the emails I should have brought up. I mean, you're wrecking the entire system. This is, you know, we've sold out now to these, it was always the credentials too narrow. What we're teaching is much more. So I'm not saying the credentials is exactly like the academic award, but I tell you what it did do. It says exactly what you can do. Some even said, well, what if our students don't pass the credential? That is a problem. That's a problem. It's kind of like what happens if the nurses don't pass the NCLEX. You can't be a nurse. So you know what? That's a great professional development tool, right? If the students aren't passing, you know, I actually heard that out loud in meetings, you know. But here's what that spawned. We embedded all those credentials. People became aware of the credentials. Then all of a sudden, the governor said, you know, I'd like to help out high school kids more. I'd like to give them access to technical education. Okay. So we started delivering it the junior and senior year through the post-secondary institutions. And early on, we don't do it anymore because it isn't needed anymore because it was popular. And we were serving about, early on, we paid the high school $1,000 for every credential that was earned by their students early on, because we thought we needed to generate enrollment. We were serving Kansas, small state, we're serving about 4,000 high school students a year in career and technical ed post-secondary programs when we started. Okay, about 4,000 a year. All of a sudden, boom, we jumped up to 12,000. Okay, it became popular. And we spend about 38 million on that program today. And here's what the program pays for. It's so popular, I say, because of the credentialing, that the legislature has funded not just the credit hour cost, but the full cost of delivery, which is very different. Okay. Out of that program, then, we just continued to build. And in Washington State, they were doing a program called Accelerating Opportunity. Okay. And that was, they started that through a foundation. And we said, we think we can do that. And we'll name ours, again, we have the catchy names. We'll name ours Accelerating Opportunity Kansas. So we call it AOK, right? No one can ever say we're not marketers. So the AOK program started, and here's what that was. I'm not trying to rep the Big Ten, but that allows that if someone, and I'll say GED, now it's a high school equivalent. So if somebody doesn't have their high school diploma, they can take a technical training area along with their high school diploma. We pay for the total cost of delivery so that when they graduate with that high school diploma, they'll also have a technical skill so they can go to work. It's not enough just to have the GED. It's an important first step, but why not do them together? There was a little more relevance. And so that was fully funded. You know what? We're a conservative state. Like the money for education, typically, it's been better the last couple of years, but typically it just doesn't flow easily. Legislators, policymakers loved these programs, okay? So then we said, well, maybe we can get the Kansas pathway to career high school equivalency. And so we took it a step further, that instead of just the GED, you could get credentials with multiple measures. So you had to get, if you could do something in math, get the credential in English, and then we have a civics portion as well. Along with technical training, you can more quickly, get your high school diploma. We've actually had a lot of our returning citizens that have accessed this, people in corrections, and those citizens are going to be returning to our communities. And the best thing we can do for those citizens is to make sure they have the education and training necessary, because what we know is if they do and they're linked to a good job, recidivism rates go way down. Okay, so I think that's really been an incredible thing that has happened through our programs. We've also worked with credentials and the military. And in fact, we just presented at Nebraska, and I trust that went well. But we have a military portal. When you're scaling the credentials, All of a sudden, you can take that military occupational specialty or the MOS, crosswalk it with a credential. It's much easier to do than an academic award. And you can start giving credit. So you can come in the other way. You can start giving credit for those to those exiting service members, getting those into programs. Sometimes they only need to take a few hours to become credentialed then into your workforce. It really is, there's really only 2 entities in Kansas that are really going to increase the talent. Because in Kansas, we're going to need more workers than our high schools can produce. Right now, what we've seen from our high schools is even though enrollments have been flat, achievement has dropped. Okay, I think you're seeing it around the country. College going rate in Kansas has dropped about 1 percentage point per year for the last 7 years. So everybody blames COVID. This happening long before COVID. And so I think it's going to be incredibly important that we're able to plug students into different pathways and give them a line of sight. And also that we can recruit from the military for our talent pipeline and also bring more students in from out of state. Our university system, generally, we recruit twice as many come into Kansas as leave Kansas, okay, to go to school. So we're coming to your states, because we need more students. I've talked to individuals from Missouri. It's the same way there as well. Now we have an interest in our university system to really start taking a look at badges. How do we start that process? How do we really scale that? How do we build that? That's why the work of Credential Engine is going to be important. Because I really believe that we've got to get more and more transparent with credentials. Again, as I said, it's easy to make up a credential. The one thing we have in academics, sometimes it's our greatest weakness, sometimes it's our greatest strength. Most people know what a credit hour is. A transcript is a lifelong registry of your learning. It's like a lifelong learning account. It's a way to document that learning, and it's generally there in a permanent way. If at my age, if I went back to the institution where I attended, and it's been a number of years ago, and said, do you have a transcript for me on what I essentially completed, they would. So with credentialing, where we need to be sure we're sophisticated enough is, do we have organizations that are going to keep a record? Is there instructor training with the credentialing? So I think that's something that's important. Do those entities, if you really want institutions to buy in, you've got to get to the faculty, right? And so that's something that this NC3 really helped us with, is we started sending instructors to their training sessions, and they loved them. Instructors come back, say, hey, we want to be a part of this credentialing because we got to meet people that work like me. I might be a single instructor department, or there's only 2 of us here. Now I get to go to this training, and who doesn't like that? So I think that's important. The quality of these credentials, right now we're at the transparency stage. There's going to be a time we've got to really start focusing on it. It's the Wild West. It really is. Now sometimes I wish that higher ed would be a little more like the Wild West, like get a little wild, but not quite as wild as the credential landscape. So that's why this work with Credential Engine is important. It's the first time we start to put an infrastructure in place at the state levels, okay? I think that's important, so that we can build registries that are going to be there. And then we've really got to focus on how do we document the learning for students. That's going to be incredibly important. I really wanted this to be more of a conversation as a keynote. So I'm not, you know, when people like Ken Sauer are out there, people who are experts on credentials, I'd like to hear from you. So I'm not going to go any longer. I appreciate the invitation. That's a little bit of, about the Kansas story, about how we really built the credentialing into the legacy part of the institution so that it could be supported with those state funds and tuition dollars. And I think if you're going to really scale credentials in your state, it's something you really need to consider. So at this time, I'd love to take questions. Yes, Sarah.
Just quickly, you mentioned the need for conversations to really start about access and success in the same token. Do you have any suggestions or recommendations on where folks can start these conversations around pathways?
Yeah, if I said we need to start a conversation, that was the wrong thing. I'm fatigued with conversation. Okay, so I'll just tell you. So we know how students can be successful. Number one, they got to have clear pathways. Okay, like Georgia State did all this work. We know we're just resistant to change. Okay, so I really believe this. If an institution does not have professional advisors, we know that's key, right? We know it. It's a proven practice. Then they probably really don't want to serve first-generation students. Not really. If an institution's not doing co-requisite remediation, you know what I'm talking about, where you have the fundamentals of math, fundamentals of math 2, intermediate algebra, almost algebra, and then finally college algebra. No one makes it through that pathway. So we know that even for people who test pretty low coming in, we know that it's still the best, right? The research is clear on that. If your institution is not doing co-requisite remediation, they're really not that interested in serving first-generation students. If we haven't established meta majors, okay? If in higher ed, if we don't have a way for a first-generation student to come in and switch their major the first year and not lose a boatload of credits, right? If you don't have that at your institution, you're probably not that interested in serving first-generation students. And as a system, we just passed a comprehensive general education package for Kansas. I have the emails. The system's still not ruined, okay, like Manny said it would be, where students, no matter where that general education is taken, it transfers course for course, not just transfer. Don't fall for that. Somebody says, well, it transfers. Well, it might transfer as an elective. That still doesn't help you mostly. Transfer course for course. We did it without legislation. I think we're one of the few states that did it without legislation. So if you don't have that, you're not that interested. I mean, it is, and you also need, and our foundations can do this, you also need emergency loan programs for upperclassmen. So how many institutions give pretty good scholarships to freshmen? We're being honest, I see some head nodding, and then the scholarship runs out. Do you know that first generation students and students of poverty will drop out over $100? $150. A very little amount of money. They don't have a support network. If you don't have the money, you don't have it. We must have emergency loans. We must be able to get those resources to students so they can complete. So that's what I'd tell you is a few of those.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your comments. And something that you just mentioned, I'd love for you to say just a little bit more about, which is the transfer of credit and how it connects to all of the credentialing pathways and opportunities that you're talking about. Particularly, I know you've done a ton of work around military credentials, for example, but also now the sort of broader world with industry credentials and prior learning assessments that institutions need to be thinking about for folks who are bringing industry credentials with them. Curious how you all are sort of looking forward about that broader question.
Yeah, so the hardest part of that is people will have PLA policy at the institution level. It's almost impossible for students to know. So it's almost impossible. So like a student will, they'll be a junior and somebody will whisper, hey, if you did this and this, you could have gotten that credit. And they're going like, I wish I'd have known that. Well, it's on the books in our policy manual that's over here that no one's ever seen or heard from. So here's what we did that's a little different. We put it at the state level. This is the key, okay? So CLEP, there's a baseline. ACE has all the standards. It's not hard to do. Every institution has to accept at least the ACE, at least that standard. So or AP and AP too. So let's say AP, you got a 4. Then here's what that means. And it means that at the 6 state universities and 19 and the community college, it means it everywhere. Okay. That's key because then you're only communicating one. Same with the military. So we say, now you can do more. Some institutions decide to do more. We put them on the website, right? You can do more. But if the military occupational specialty is this, then here's the least you can do. But we get everybody together. We have we have that discussion. We determine what that is. And here, because it's just too hard to communicate when it's all by institution. And I would say at one time, we had individual departments determining what the transfer was going to be, okay? It's impossible to communicate to the outside world. So that's why I like credentialing, is because you can back it in. You can back in a student with PLA, or you can give a student with really no college credit a stair-step way to get there. Yes.
So did I hear you saying that as part of that kind of state baseline at the state level, it includes a requirement for transfer to the next level of it?
So I'm not understanding your question.
So we have similar, for at least some of the areas of accepting credits, but then in transfer, it's really messed up where you can accept it as a program credit, as an elective. So are you requiring that if it's accepted as a program credit, it transfers as a program credit?
So, yeah, so let me just explain what we have, and then Jenny, you cut me off when you need to. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll explain what we have. So what we did with the general, many times you'll see if you complete an associate degree, then you get junior status. What does that really mean? Okay, there's a lot of, so I've always said, the baccalaureate level faculty, you tell me which 62 hours or 60 hours you're going to accept, and which 60 hours this transfer student's going to need. That's a better way to look at that, okay? But here's what we did with Gen Ed, and we're not all the way through. Like, we still have to go program by program, because all these have to be worked out. And you do have to be concerned about quality. You want students to have the same experience. A transfer student needs to have the same set of skills and abilities at the end that a native student does. But what we did with the general education is we recognized the modern student might attend multiple institutions and might transfer without an associate degree. And in fact, probably will, okay? Likely. So the old agreement was always, if you have an associate degree, you get to be here. But if you don't, we're gonna cast you into the cauldron of, we're not sure what might happen with your credits. And And it might just depend on who you got at the front office on which transfer, okay? That's happened. So what we did is we bucketed the general education. So maybe English has a 6-hour bucket, and then humanities has a bucket, and then history has a bucket. And then does history count here or does it count here? And that's a big conversation, right? And then math has a bucket. And if you completed the bucket, you got the hours. So again, it's almost this segmenting of, so if you just did 3 hours, you need to do 6 or whatever that bucket says. But if you completed the bucket, you didn't have to complete all of the gen ed to take advantage. The old articulation agreements, it was always like, you had to complete it all. The modern student, not gonna do that. They're gonna move, they're gonna have multiple institutions. So how do we serve them? That's what we tried to do. Yes.
I'm just curious how you address like English language learners with credentialing, or students with like international credit, or maybe they got a bachelor's degree overseas.
So that was, that did come up. We have, so you want me to talk about TOEFL a little bit? Yeah, so
Sure, yeah. Someone who's a citizen,
and I,
maybe needs to
I'm
run their English.
I'm going to not remember the other standard, but one time I was talking to a group of university distinguished faculty. And that what I love about talking to the university distinguished professors, or the UDP, is it's one of the groups that'll give you the truth. They're really not afraid with being very unvarnished. And, you know, they just kind of said, the board's ridiculous that it only accepts TOEFL and there's a second standard. I didn't know anything about it. So I did a little research, had the team do some research. We looked, we should be accepting that. So the next meeting, the board passed the policy for all the universities. So it can be done, but it had never filtered up through the system to get to the board level to change that policy. We've got a lot of growth that we need to do with English as a second language too. That one of our, not only in terms of credentialing, in terms of thinking more how to offer credentialing bilingual, but also geography. So in some families, going 150 miles away to college, even though we'd say that's not very far, they're still in the same state, they're not going to do it. So how do we deliver teaching, nursing, some of those high impact degrees for those communities? How do we deliver those closer to? And sometimes that can make a bigger difference than trying to translate everything. You know, I mean, it really is about all kinds of ways to mitigate that, and so that's what we're thinking about there. But we need a lot of growth there. Yes, Mike.
To what extent are students taking advantage, or potential students taking advantage of what you're using in Credential Engine to find the programs? Are you using it as part of marketing? Are counselors moving in that direction? Do businesses say, take a look at this?
You know, so I'd say it's mixed. And that's another area of growth. So, but here's why I'm not discouraged. The first step is you have to build it. Okay. It wasn't that long ago, we were all set. I was on an education advisory group. That's what Scott Cheney called us. I don't know what that, but we were talking about Credential Engine. Scott said it's our 5th year anniversary, so it's not long. We have finally, here's where we are in Kansas. We've used APIs to make sure that Credential Engine, the minute the data is entered, it stays current with the registry. So I think that's a key part of it. How many people are taking advantage of it? I don't know. You know, but I think that's our next step, right? You have to scale it, build it out, and then you have to market it. So I would say the numbers probably there are still modest, but that's really the next step. Yes.
Your military articulation portal is fantastic. I really like the transparency.
I'd love to take credit for it. It's our data team. It's Nathan. I mean, like, it really is. We said, hey, let's do this. And they were like, oh boy, you know, so it's that took work, but it is nice.
Indeed. The transparency between institutions where a student veteran can go in and say, this is my MOS, this institution will give me this much toward my degree, all of that. So again, with the transparency piece, as I work across different states and different regions, everybody wants to know, because of course there's a good business case for bringing veterans back to your state. We're seeing military attrition at an all-time high, for better, worse, or different. Has the tool that you put in place, is it being leveraged, and have you found success bringing veterans back to Kansas as a result?
So we have more success than if we didn't have the tool. We're not where we want to be. So Kansas attracted, I think some of these tools have helped to attract companies. So we attracted, we had more business growth than any other state per capita in the union this last year. So these programs do matter. When companies are settling in your state and they see, hey, they at least have a strategy on how to recruit back military service, exiting service members. We have kind of a Promise Act as well with our technical program. So they pay for all technical training for anyone in the entire state, starting at the junior year in high school. They pay for all the credentials. You know, most companies, that's what I found out when I was working with the Department of Commerce, and now I still am involved with much of the recruitment on the kind of the back end. But most companies, number one thing, talent pipeline. Used to be, you know, they wanted to settle for other, you know, is the sewer right, is the land right, is now talent pipeline. So I think all these things can grow a state. And, you know, the military piece, there's only, we also have Army University right there in Kansas at Fort Leavenworth. That's what we worked on quite a bit. And the provost there said, we'd like to take this to a lot of other states. And I was like, hold it now. You know, that's one of our advantages, right? But we're glad to share it. We want exiting service members to have the best opportunity they can. So thank you for that. Yes.
I just like your thoughts about reskilling and sort of the future potential. Burning Glass, which is now Lightcast, used to have this visualization of related jobs. So you'd be looking up at an occupation and they would pull up, you know, your data analyst, or here's 6 other fields of work, and you could then drill into those fields of work. And that doesn't seem to be there anymore with this other tool that bought out, MC, which is, anyway, I digress. But I would love, I mean, I'm just trying to envision a future where we know there's going to be obsolescence in a lot of fields of work over time. Wouldn't it be great if we had something where an individual, you know, these are the competencies I possess through my training and work and education. Where do I go? What do I need to build on to get to something that is, you know, not obsolescent in the marketplace right now? So when you think about like the future of work in America, what do you think is the future for enabling tools that help individuals, I guess, have meaningful long-term careers at a time when everything is changing?
Yeah, so we're not going to be able to change the skill set of our workforce by only focusing on the emerging workforce. We're hyper-focused on juniors and seniors in high school, freshmen and sophomores, you know, young people entering the system. That's what we're hyper-focused on, right? But if you look at the numbers, you're not going to change the skill level of your workforce by only focusing on there. And here's the troublesome part. Problematic, I'd say. Higher education, post-secondary education, if we're just really honest about it, we've never served incumbent workers at scale. again, we have little boutique programs here and there, or, oh, you can take a night class at the community college if you can, you know. But we just have not done it as well at scale. I think we have an opportunity here, and I think perhaps coming out of the pandemic, we can leverage online with chunking of the curriculum into credentialing that industry says is of value. Let's not forget that industry validation. That's key, you know. And then if we can get a tool that says, okay, what adults need to see that are working is, number one, they can't quit their job. You know, it's like, well, just come back to school for a while. Well, like, I've got these obligations. So they need to be able to say, you can do this much. And then, you know what? You can get this better job. And then we have to have cooperation with the employer community. Okay. You know, many times my friends in the business community come to us when it's a crisis. You know, I get it. We'll wear you down in education. Like, that's why I said, like, the conversation piece is like, you know, they've got to make money, right? They've got to keep that business successful. So they don't have a lot of time. So they've got to help us by saying and delivering on that if you receive this credential, this extra, maybe it's 6 credit hours, maybe that's a combination, maybe we don't use seat time as much as we use you know, competencies, that you can move to this other occupation or upskill. But traditionally, we really haven't, our systems really haven't served the incumbent workforce at scale.
But it's not only that, it's also the federal financial aid. There's tremendous need for advocacy in this space to enable more, as you say, incumbent workers to reposition themselves.
The infrastructure is not set up for it traditionally. So, yeah. Yeah.
Blake, just to follow up on a couple of points you made, with reference to credentials that are valued at the state level, have you figured out a good mechanism to stay in touch with industry needs to the point where you can see the credentials that are needed, and perhaps not just today, but for the industries that are going to pay off because they're the future economy? Have you figured out a way to stay in touch with industry needs so that you can meet the workforce needs not only of today but tomorrow?
So that's in the Excel and Career Tech Ed program that we have, we look at the credentials and look at their wage, and they have to be what we've designated as you know, a livable wage, high wage, or they fall out. Okay, so and then generally we have a little bit of time, like they don't fall out in a year because, you know, you have people in the pipeline, but then they transition out the next year, and then you can get back in with higher wages. So wages are going to fluctuate within industry. So we've done a little bit of that. You know, the jobs of the future, that is always interesting to me. I used to think about that quite a bit, and we hear that a lot is in education, where we're not just preparing you for the first job, we're preparing you for those jobs that don't exist yet. We hear that a lot. I do agree that you need a broad skill set to be able to problem solve, okay? But there is some research that shows that if you don't get a good first job, you stay underemployed forever. It's actually, and I'll send it to you, it's actually amazing. So I'm saying it's not bad to focus on the future. We should have students, graduates that have that skill set that you know, but if you get a bad first job, you traditionally never get back up into being on a really good career path. That's just what the broader numbers say. Now, everybody's got an uncle that, well, his first 2 jobs were really bad, and now he's a multimillionaire, you know, so, but generally by the numbers. So that's what we've done with credentials in terms of credentials of value. Here's what I've run into. Here's the sticky wicket that I've run into with the institutions and with different organizations, is people want to talk about critical jobs, not high wage jobs. So do we credential for critical jobs? I'm torn. Let's talk about, there's the childcare elephant in the room, right? So we need more childcare workers. And they need to be credentialed. In Kansas, we have quite a bit of regulation around childcare. If you look at the wages for childcare, they're going to be in a life of poverty. So what do we do about that? And I think the answer lies with business and industry. The state cannot pay for everything, right? It can't. So it has to be, maybe it's a partnership. I'm all for public-private partnership, but business, if you want this workforce to engage, because I tell you, a lot of times it fell on women, okay? We're honest, that's where some of the childcare, much of the childcare responsibilities fell. And after this pandemic, people kind of figured out, you know what, I might be able to just stay home. I don't have to get back into the workforce. You know, we just have one income now. Maybe I do a little bit here on the side, but we don't have near as many expenses. So if business wants to increase this participation, which is good for them, then we've got to have assistance with that. And so those critical, you know, when we get into the areas of critical jobs, do we continue to pay for those credentials? The Kansas answer has been, we will. We'll continue to pay for those. We'll continue to fund that education. I don't know what the right answer should be on that, but I know that if we don't solve or at least mitigate the childcare issue, we're going to have a hard time being competitive. Yes.
I'm in the workforce space, that customized training that you talked about. And I agree.
So you're entrepreneurial, guarantee it.
I was going to say, we can be very nimble, like
Right.
you said, we can be very creative. But what have you seen that has been successful in kind of getting that buy-in to the validity of what we can do with business and industry, working with our friends on the academic side and saying, we can provide these credentials in a creative way, but we want them to lead to this pathway. I think there's some schools that are very interested in working with us and that creativity, and others are like, that's outside the bounds of academia.
Yeah, it can be a little scary for an institution. You know, we had to force it. You know, we had to force the collaboration. If they have credentials aligned with their academic programs, then it works because you deliver that credential and it can back into kind of a PLA situation, right? But if they don't, and it's brand new, you saw the old picture of me, the way I looked before this work. I mean, it's hard work. Like it required in Kansas, it required a state push, and it required tying funding to that activity, and just a lot of hard work to make sure that happens. Because again, I don't believe these systems are just going to change on their own. But I'd love to look at a little deeper at what you have and see if I couldn't help you. I know we're getting close to time, aren't we?
Yeah, 2 more minutes. I had a question. This came up as we were having lunch. One of the issues, and again, we talked a couple of times about how we just don't have the infrastructure, those deeper roots of things. I'll just say again, it's another mapping or that well, a couple of people have mentioned it today, is that so much of the work we have to do is very separated from the ultimate outcome. And so again, whether it's childcare, early childhood education, building that, building the credential maps and everything. But one of the things that I feel like is still an issue is how we define success as institutions. Because when we think about outcomes as based on degrees attained or things of that nature, rather than maybe credentials complete awarded or things like that, that's a big issue, both with transfer and with helping people make their way through the system as it is newly configured. And students don't stay at the same institution. They do transfer, they do go other places. How do we begin to rethink our definition of ourselves and measure it?
A little bit of a society. In America, we think something's wrong with you if you didn't get a baccalaureate degree. We think what went wrong. So we think that in high school too. If you don't get a high school diploma, you say, well, I got my GED. The first thing people say, if they're just, or think, they might not say it anymore, hopefully, but they think something went wrong. And we really don't think about that when people enter higher ed. We don't think about maybe this person wants to be in this occupation and it requires this much formal education, not education. But we think if it's not a complete baccalaureate degree, we think, well, why would you do that? There's something wrong with that. And we, number one, we've got to give, as society, we've got to give respect to all lines of work. Okay, that's number one. And then the second piece of that is that we have mechanisms in place, and they're old and they're archaic, but they are an infrastructure, degrees, that was so important. So if we're going to start using credentials really as measurement, then we're going to have to sort the credentials. Becoming an RN, they always say, well, it's part of the ladder. So they always say, well, a CNA is the first part of the ladder. Well, it might be, but there's several rungs to get to the RN, okay? We can't say, well, an institution generated 1,000 CNAs and this one did only 800 RNs and the 1,000's better than the 800. Well, that doesn't make any sense. So we're going to have to sort through and do some work on that quality of credential. And not that the credential, the short-term credential is low quality, but the short-term credential does not require the skills and abilities, maybe this credential over here. Then we can use them for measurement. It's easier with baccalaureate degrees because most of them are about 120 credit hours. Some 128 engineering, a few of them, but what are they at 124? Yeah, we have so much structure in that system that it's just easier to count those across universities. Any other questions? Yes.
I have another one.
Okay.
Kind of piggybacking off of like certain departments at the university may not find that credentialing is a good fit for them. I'm guessing it's the humanities, maybe. That is definitely.
Which departments like it? That's what I'd like to know.
But like, is there a space for the humanities according to your like industry partners, or what are some of those connections?
There's at one of our institutions, Wichita State University, is really they really have an applied learning mantra where every student's going to have an applied learning experience. And they've probably done as good a job incorporating the humanities into that and really bringing that to the forefront. A lot of things that are taught in the humanities are really valuable for the modern day. And not just as you sit on your back deck and, philosophize. I'm talking about in the workforce in the modern day. So I do think that we've had institutions that probably do a better job of that, of making that real. I will tell you that the new learner wants to find engagement and how the learning applies immediately. So if our professors or faculty are not doing as good a job connecting that to the new workplace or to their life experiences, it's going to be really, really hard to get engaged learners. I don't see any more questions. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Well, thank you for the lively discussion. I think, we're all concerned about this, and you've certainly given us so many good examples, Blake, of the good work in Kansas. So thank you very much. So we're going to take a little break. We will be back at 3:15, but you can go straight to the rooms where your small group is meeting. Let me start making this look. As they can. Correct me if I'm wrong, Annika, these are self-selected rooms. Yes, good. All right. Okay, I can't make this go, but I will get it going while you're gone. What are the room numbers again? Can someone read them for me?
245 will be the career and technical education pathways conversation, and 246 will be the technology for credential transparency conversation. Both of those rooms are past where we had lunch and down the back hallway. So you can make your way, and then for those folks that are online, we'll open up the virtual breakout sessions shortly, and you can choose which session you'd like to join virtually.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I think we've got everyone back after our breakout sessions. I hope so. I hope we didn't lose any. So I hope you had some interesting conversations. I've heard some of the overflow in just the last few minutes, and it sounds pretty interesting. We're going to continue with the show and tell time, because honestly, I have great respect for kindergarten teachers and all that they teach us. And show and tell is one of the best things. It's one of the things that we do very well at Max. So now we are about to have our mini grant showcase. As you know, that part of the way that we structured the grant when we talked to Carolyn about it was that we wanted the money to flow to the states to help them take care of some little projects, pilot them, just put some money in these little places to see what would work, because we are still in a lot of ways in the experimental phase of this work. So we did have a number of states get those mini grants, receive those mini grants, and do some really interesting work. So I'm going to invite Rachel Vilsek from Credential Engine up here. She is filling the shoes, Emily's shoes, but now they're going to be Rachel's shoes. They're Rachel's shoes. We're going to miss Emily, but Rachel's going to do a great job and help us hear from everyone. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And thank you, everyone. I'm really excited for this session because it will really be an opportunity for us to hear 5 diverse examples of different approaches that states have taken to credential transparency. So each of our 5 mini grantees will have 10 minutes to walk through the goals of their project, the work they've done to date, and what their plans are for the future. And we'll start with the Kansas Board of Regents. So Nathan, please come up. All of the slides that you submitted have been added, so you can just click your way through.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here. My name is Nathan Snyder. I am a reporting research specialist with the Kansas Board of Regents for I don't know how many years now. I'll say it's fairly easy to follow Dr. Flanders because he sets a really high bar, but I'm kind of down here a little bit. But he's also talked about like at least 2/3 of the things that I'm going to talk about today. So the introduction's already there. So with our mini grants, we decided on 4 goals. It was more at one point, it was less at one point. The nice thing about this is that these are things that we talked about for years of doing, and just the resources weren't necessarily there. And the other nice thing about it is that it's about capacity building. So the first two things up there are dealing with transfer value profiles. And, you know, I was part of the task force originally when we developed this and put a use case out there for it. So it just makes sense to do it now. People have talked about the military that's on there. The third one is for pathway information with our program alignments. That's the technical post-secondary credentials that all the institutions have to align with industry recognized credentials. And the last one is for the AOK stuff that Dr. Flanders talked about. So the first thing that I don't think Dr. Flanders talked about, and the only one that might be, would be the, for every fall, I believe, teachers get together or faculty groups get together and say, here's a list of courses that we want to align across our institution. Here's a list of core outcomes or competencies that we want to align across the institutions. And so a student, after it goes through approval, a student who takes one at one institution can be guaranteed transfer to the other institution that offers the equivalent course. You can see the bottom thing there, that's from our Transfer Kansas portal. That actually has the 100+ transfer courses, 7,000+ institution courses that can be transferred, and all the competencies in a PDF form, which is what you also see there. And the nice thing about Credential Engine is when we put this out as a use case, they said, okay, we'll consume that. They'll make a whole bunch of resources. They have code out there for us to build a baseline on. So we really wanted to do it. And so, and the idea is that that transparency for those courses helps keep those costs, or helps the student make those decisions and keep those costs down and then keep them on track to graduate. Also, and I just told Ken this, it's the first time we are submitting course level data. We've never done this before, so having those processes will make the other goals easier. So where are we? We took that original information, coalesced it together, tweaked it a little bit. I sent it to Dr. Carla Wiscombe in our academic affairs department, who's our system-wide transfer guru. And she gave a thumbs up for about 80% of it and helped me tweak the rest. And then the background tables are being developed now. We gave all that to our developer. And so this week or next week, it should be in the sandbox. And then hopefully within a month, it's actually in the registry. Goal number 2 for us is all that information from that military articulation portal that Dr. Flanders and others have seen. So the board convenes faculty and administrators to look at their course outcomes and compares it to those MOS and Cs. For those that haven't seen it, that is our military articulation portal. It's at military.kansasregents.org. I can filter on Navy, look at leading culinary specialists at the E4 level, and then those are the courses that I can get from Butler Community Colleges as credit for prior learning, and all the programs off to the right there. Yeah. So again, it's transfer, it's credit for prior learning. The enhanced transparency behind it will help those veterans and active service members reduce their costs by making those smarter choices, expedite those post-secondary goals. And the other aspect of this is more selfishly internal for the board office, is that it allows the others to consume the data. If we get that in the registry, Army U's already asked us for this years ago, so it should make it easier for them to get it. And if we can connect to those military competencies, then it becomes a lot richer for them and for us. In terms of status, it's coming soon. We meet every 2 weeks. I think we have one on Wednesday, but it'll be a couple weeks before we talk about this. Okay, so what we call program alignment, which is basically a pathway for goal number 3. We want another proof of concept and this is where the Kansas Post-Secondary Technical Education Authority, the TEA, meets with our Kansas Department of Commerce, meets with our institution, meets with businesses and industry leaders to really align those technical post-secondary programs to what they need and to align with those recognized third-party credentials. So on our website, we actually have 25 of these program alignments: medical coding, nursing, HVAC system, and this is a PDF of the welding version. The information out there is great because it shows the process. You get a certificate A, you have these qualifications, sometimes these courses, and then you reach a valid exit point so you can get a job and get those industry recognized credentials. The thing about our website is it's not institution specific. So when you go to our website to look at this, you don't know which institutions have this. And even if they have, in this case, all 4 exit points. So it's important to us because we hope that it's easier to digest by the public and also to kind of show us what our data system needs to grow to be able to do this. Because we love API. We only really want to do API. So, because it's automatic, it's easier. So this is my favorite slide. And part of that is because we're almost done with this work. The other part is that diagram you see up there. That is Hutchinson Community College's pathway set for welding. So the little tiny green boxes across the top are the 4 exit points. Everything down to your left side are all the courses that we have and all the boxes that have to reference that. And what we can see out of this is in our system, we don't have that says anything that says course A leads to course B, then onwards. We can kind of tell that by names, but there's no way for us to actually do that across the board. And our last goal. So we actually are going to publish our Accelerating Opportunity in Kansas, or AOK information, but as a credential approval list. So again, something new for us. So like Dr. Flanders said, it's delivering career and tech ed education with adult basic skills instruction. There are pathway frameworks, so plumbing, carpentry, medical coding, that's all different pathways that somebody could fall into. And the idea is that it will lead to immediate jobs. So again, we love our PDFs. Everybody does, I hope. All of this information is out there at an institution level, and you can see the pathway and you can see the industry recognized credential. But again, we don't know what the program is that leads to it. Most of them are probably going to say CNA or certified nurse aide, but some might not. I don't really know. So hopefully this makes it a little bit more transparent for those students, help them see what they need to enroll in without having to necessarily call the college. We could have a widget out there, whatever it is, and then get those industry recognized credentials and lead to those jobs. I think we're talking about this Wednesday. So, and then the timeline to publish in the registry should be the middle of November. And probably everybody's favorite slide. Thank you.
Will the slides be available to us all?
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you. That was wonderful to see those complex diagrams that those at Credential Engine know and love so well. Up next, we are excited to welcome Dee Dee from Ferris State University to tell us about their project.
Well, thank you so much. It's so good to be here and to be able to talk about the work that we're doing. I have to admit, I'm really jealous of those that are here kind of representing an entire state or a state board, right? In Michigan, it doesn't happen really well where it's, you know, everything kind of is consistent across the board. So I'm excited to hear from others who have that type of a state system, how things might look in your states as well. In Michigan, we have a community college association. So we have the K-12, obviously, and that's mandated. We have a community college association that leads our public community colleges. They can't really mandate what they do because that's not the way we're set up. Same thing for our public universities and then our private colleges and universities. So in Michigan, we have very siloed structure in many instances. When the grant opportunity came up, one of the things that excited me was the opportunity to, because we don't have the state system where I could say, hey, who wants to party with me and do this, right? So it was really more a matter of, okay, what can we do from Ferris that we can then, you know, share with others and then help them to replicate to really get other colleges or universities on board in the state as well. So I'm excited from that perspective. I did not bring slides with, but I can send slides later so that they can be included as well. Some of the things that I did want to talk about is, a couple of the reasons that we felt like this grant was a good opportunity is we're doing a lot of work at Ferris State around equity and inclusion. And how could we utilize this grant to make sure that our information is out there and so that we can help to reduce barriers to access for individuals in the state of Michigan, whether regardless of what credential they're looking for. And so that's part of what was important for us and what drew us to the grant to start with. One of the things that it's been fun, right? As we worked through the grant, we thought we knew when we wrote the grant how we wanted to go about pulling all the data together. What we discovered is that our IR department, or institutional research, was actually able to help us pull some of it together where we didn't have to have students manually pulling all the information together. So part of our grant, we wrote in for student interns from our marketing program to really help us to go through and kind of look at the catalog and pull all of those courses that needed to be input, put them into a spreadsheet, and then for us to be able to upload them. Well, what we discovered working with our institutional research, and Ferris, like many institutions, right? We have silos in different areas. Our institutional research happens to report to our student affairs versus academic affairs. So we don't always have control of the time that those individuals have to work with us. So we did discover, we brought them in early on and said, okay, how can you help us to pull this data? And it has been a challenge for them, but they have been able to create some programs to go in and pull that information for us so that we can get it uploaded. So for us, our next step is we've met a lot. Our institutional research department is pulling that data together so that we can get it uploaded. What we found is that we're able to then have our students that we hired to work with us for the grant to help them to have a little bit of a different focus. So the first thing that we knew we wanted to do, right, was to get all of the course information, the credential information, and get that uploaded. We thought we were going to have the students do a lot of that work. Once we discovered we didn't have to have them do quite all of that, the other part of the work we had wanted the students to do, though, was to work with our marketing team to develop a plan of how are we going to document and then share this information out, both digitally and in print, throughout the state. And then how are we going to develop a marketing plan of such, or a communication plan? How are we going to share that information out with other colleges and universities in the state of Michigan as well? So that's been the focus of our student interns. So while it wasn't quite what I anticipated it to be, it's turned out to be a really valuable experience for them to get that hands-on experience and be able to include in their resume, right, that they've done some hands-on developing of marketing plans and communication plans for a grant. So we're excited about that. Another piece that was just mentioned and is always exciting to me, my work at Ferris, I'm in charge of the Office of Transfer and Secondary School Partnerships. So I work with high schools. I have all dual enrollment opportunities go through my department. I also have all transfer partnerships, assessment of prior learning, academic credit opportunities for veterans, right? So a lot of things that touch this work. So we've done some work. We had a grant a number of years ago for a military credit equivalency grant. That's tying into this grant as well. So we're continuing to have our faculty look at how those military credits are coming in and how can we make sure that they're meaningful credits, not just going to elective credits, and how are we bringing in credits for credentialing, right? So if someone comes in with a CompTIA certification, what are we doing with that? And how are we including it here? So that's important work on from our perspective as well. In Michigan, one thing that we do have, and colleges can opt in, is we do have My Transfer Pathways, and now we're working on My Workforce Pathways. My Transfer Pathways, we took 6 different pathways in the state, and so we have transfer liaisons at every college or university that meet, and we took 6 pathways where we see a lot of transfer, and we got the universities in the state to agree that these 5 classes would come in automatically from these colleges and go toward those programs at the universities. So for us, it's a different way to look at the pathway concept, but we're able to do that at least with 6 programs for now. Now we're looking at it from a My Workforce Pathway, and how can we bring in some of that credentialing that might not be academic credit, but it was given credit at the community college. How do we bring all of that in? But all of that's very relevant to this work as well. So we're excited to be able to bring that to what we're going to upload. And then for me, one of the pieces, as I mentioned, I work with K-12s, I work with community college partners, I work with our university partners in the state, and serve as a transfer liaison. So being able to really help develop those true pathways from high school to college, whether it's an associate's degree from a community college or a certificate, to a university, whether again, it's an associate's at a university, or it's a bachelor's degree, or maybe it's a master's. So that's been exciting to see how we're going to be able to upload that. The transfer procedures and transfer information that's relevant is another piece that we are pulling together that will be uploaded once we get to that, because there's a lot of for all of us, that transfer piece can be really complicated, and helping students to understand what do they need to know, how do they go about finding that information. So for us, we're building our model at Ferris as a model that we can use in the state of Michigan to help others to bring on this type of work and to really get involved. I'll share slides later, but that's kind of my update.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Advancing credential transparency and providing hands-on experience for interns. I love it. Up next, we have Ohio, and in particular, Miami University, who's going to be talking about their micro-credential program. And as a Miami University grad, I just have to say, go Red Hawks. I'll turn it over.
Thanks for joining us today, guys. So we're Miami University Regionals, and we partnered together for a little bit. My name is Emily Hughes, and I'm the engagement specialist. So I work a lot with our students, admission, advising, as well as like the marketing. So all like that sort of stuff with micro-credentials.
My name is Erica Crawford. I'm the program manager for micro-credentials at Miami. And I just joined the team about a year ago. Emily just joined the team about 2 months ago. So we're all very new in this, but we're very excited to be here today. So to give you a background about our micro-credential programs, it was originally started when we were hearing from local business leaders that would be like, we have these people that work on the manufacturing line, and they're great at the line work and we love them. So we promote them to be manager. And then they absolutely hate it and quit right away because they have no clue how to manage, right? And so this idea was that we would kind of bundle some of our courses together based off of what our local industry said they wanted and needed. So we would bundle about 1 to 4 college courses together in a high demand skill. So we have like digital marketing, agile methodology, Spanish, organizational leadership. So that kind of gives you some background about us.
Definitely. And so Erica pretty much covered a lot of this, but we really believe in our programs because we're an open access institution. So we're open admission, so anybody can get in. They're offered 100% online. We do have options for in-person as well. They can all be done within a year.
And like I said, Emily and I are both relatively new. And one of the things that I had found when I first started as the micro-credential, I was an engagement specialist originally. And I was Googling it and I stumbled upon the credential engine and credential registry. And I was like, this is such an awesome concept and really aligns with our values of transparency, visibility, and students just knowing really what they're getting themselves into. And so it was on my list to add our micro-credentials to it. And then it was still on my list to add our micro-credentials to it. And that went on for a few months. So when I saw this grant opportunity, I was like, this would be perfect to get us a graduate student intern, perhaps, to get our credentials actually published.
But it actually really turned into, we offered $10,000. That was awesome. So we were able to hire 3 part-time staff. And so it's a temporary, they're done in December, but it's been really cool to come together. And it took us a little bit longer to get everything moving and grooving than we thought. So Erica, you got the grant back in May?
Yes, so we got it in May, and the idea was we were gonna hire summer interns, but higher ed does not move at any sort of reasonable pace. So we actually just got our people hired in September. And we did end up with 3 part-time temporary people that have just kind of gotten their feet wet and work started. So that's exciting.
It is. And so this is our job description, and we're gonna have a QR code at the very end if you want to kind of take some of our tools that we implemented. But
And things you want to highlight on that, Erica? I don't really think so. I think we're good here. So we did end up hiring 3 different people, one of which, like, their sole job is just creating that giant spreadsheet. Somebody talked about it earlier, the big spreadsheet of all the learning outcomes. How long does it take? All of those types of things. So that's one of the person's positions. We have one that's specifically looking at academic pathways. So where she started was working with our high schoolers and looking at what credentials could you learn while in high school, completely paid for by the state. So by the time you graduate, you can say, I have this in cybersecurity along with my high school degree. So that's where she's starting with the academic pathways. And then the last one is helping me with data and assessment. It's one of those pieces that we know that we need, but when they started the program, they maybe didn't set up all those pieces ahead of time. So now we're doing a little bit of catch up, and so she's helping us figure out how to integrate data moving forward.
So some of the challenges that, things that take a while. We also had staff that didn't have higher ed backgrounds. It ended up being a really rich perspective that we were able to bring in. But we had to do some catch up and training them on what exactly micro credentials are. I'm sure you guys know, you talk to people, they have no idea what this is. And then, so staff are working different hours. We're being really flexible with everybody since they already have a full-time job. So we're just kind of trying to find times to work together and communicate. And of course, we're a team of 2, so taking on this big challenge. But some of the opportunities, optional touch points that we do with the staff, they really appreciate Erica's very detail oriented and really good at planning out this project timeline. And so it's been really fun to do.
Yeah, and so I think as we alluded to already, we did put together all the documents that we have created for this particular position. So the job description, the project plan template, which is another giant spreadsheet with different outcomes or questions to consider. I think somebody else mentioned earlier, maybe even Susie, about when you first started, you thought this is what you would have them doing, and then by the end, it evolved a little bit. So we did try to work in some time for that as well, but we just wanted you to have some of that background information.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily and Erica. I'm going to go back really quickly because I saw some phones coming out. And if you did want to take a picture of this QR code, I want to make sure that you get a chance. I really appreciated that you recognize that connection between the transparency of this work and that it aligns with your organizational values to really show students what they're going to get as a result of these programs. Up next is Jess Niebuhr from Minnesota State Colleges and Universities.
Hello, as Rachel said, I'm Jess Niebuhr. I work as the Senior Manager for Strategic Partnerships for our state, Minnesota State system. And with me is Sherry Hutchinson, who really manages our curriculum process from the state perspective. And so we wanted to share initially just a little bit about kind of where we started in this process. And before I get into that, I'll say that our project is primarily a technology project, that our mini grant was funded. But when you talk about our technology project that we're looking at, there's all kinds of relationships and policy that are impacted through this discussion of transitioning technology. So really initially we're engaged in many system and cross-section initiatives that involve credential transparency, where credential transparency keeps being brought up. And currently we use a tool, Curriculum Navigator, from a system perspective to manage our curriculum. But most of our colleges either have handmade systems, they manage their curriculum manually through spreadsheets, or some of them have purchased systems. So of our many, many institutions, We have 35 institutions right now.
So that use it.
Yeah, that use Curriculum Navigator. And our non-credit curriculum is managed through an entirely different process, and we're really pretty intensely starting on a credit for prior learning and non-credit to credit pathway programs, and that's really restricted by having the curriculum in 2 different places and student information as well. So non-credit students currently do not generate what we call a STAR ID, which makes them a student. In terms of, so the way that we are pretty much represented on Credential Engine, the way that we do that is through our state CTPL. And that was an original project that we did with Credential Engine. Rachel was one of the early people that said, we can do this through the state ETPL, which took a lot off my worry list. But it's limited what we upload to our WIOA approved programs. And that was a decision that we made going through the process. One of the projects we're working on is a definition of what is a quality credential in Minnesota. And we didn't have that at the time. So we used WIOA, but that leaves out a lot of our programming as well. And so that we also have an interest in moving to something that would allow us, especially our graduate programs and some of our other programs that aren't on the ETPL. So what are some of the challenges that that our current state is leaving us with? A big is that we're seeing an accelerated change in the requirements of who we share curriculum with. And we do not have a way to keep up with those changing requirements. So as our ETPL wants to change the information that they have, that's a very long, slow process for us to collect that information. And we're also seeing many errors. And as I said earlier, our error reduction system is completely manual. And so that's very time consuming. And just a lot of our goals related to both credit and non-credit pathways can't be enforced because we don't have the information to be able to do that. Even things like having an accurate website that we put out on our program pages honestly can't be enforced in our current system. We find those errors and fix them. And so there's just a lack of consistencies, and pathway information is something we really like to publish, but we don't have that information at all currently. And especially pathways related to credit for prior learning and our workforce development and ABE to credit programming. So what are some of the opportunities? Well, just aligning credential transparency, course program management with a huge range of initiatives, as I said. We are moving to a new ERP system, which will consolidate. Workday is the system that's been selected. And that'll consolidate everything from human resources and finance to our very archaic student information system. But decisions haven't been made yet on whether we give up our school today, which is our current non-credit system. And there's been no looking yet at our curriculum management system. And so this is allowing us to get ahead on that. And when they come to that, which then will happen fast, that we're ready to say we need these things out of the system, or we need a system another system that'll plug and play with Workday. I did want to take just a minute to talk about some of the other aligned initiatives, because I think they're pretty important in Minnesota. The adult learner pathways of all kinds, those are especially focused on underrepresented adult learners. That's an area that we're really wanting to work with. Minnesota is rich with community-based organizations that do workforce training and adult basic education. And the more we can partner, those organizations are in the communities, they're trusted, they're familiar, our colleges are not. And so the more we can partner and build bridges, the better. Credit for prior learning crosswalks. We have a C-Plan credit for prior learning assessment network that is building a platform that will cover, basically have a behind the scenes process that's predictable, but it will also include all of our pre-assessed crosswalks for credit for prior learning. So students will be able to see where they will get credits for what previous learning credentials, that kind of thing. We were just approved in August as an ability to benefit state plans state. And much to my joy, guided self-placement was approved as our means of assessing student readiness for ability to benefit. So we're thrilled about that. And as I mentioned earlier, we're working with our colleagues in our Office of Higher Education, our Department of Employment and Economic Development, and others, the private college groups, in building a definition for quality credentials in Minnesota. We've taken a little different tact on that than other states in that initiative, in that we're going from training to graduate school and doing a quality framework that will cover them all. And part of the reason we're doing that is so that we can really talk about pathways into credit and really push for that pathways into credit and push credit to accept those pathways, and using the money that follows that quality definition as the incentive. State financial aid for non-degree credentials, and then transfer pathways and guided learning pathways is an initiative that's big in our state. It's not as much in my area of work, so Sherry can probably talk about that more if you have questions. So what are our project goals? Well, we've really created a rubric. We've really looked at what was missing last time we wrote a contract for a curriculum management system. And a lot of it was the stuff around equity and being able to communicate about curriculum pathways, all of that. And so we've developed a rubric, and really on one page it has the more prescriptive technology solutions that I'd say are very detailed. And then on the other page, it has more of the programmatic sides that are so important to us in doing this new kind of work. And we want to engage college and universities in reviewing that. I think pricing was on an earlier slide. We really need to look at pricing, because right now, would we do system pricing? Would we do a combination? That would be a new requirement for colleges and universities during the time of tight budgets, but we don't have a budget for it at this point. So part of our proposal is to submit a budget proposal and receive budget to move forward. The slide lists a few of the systems that we've been looking at. And I put a lot more detail on the slide with the idea that you'd have them. And so what are some of the special considerations? I may have already jumped into some of these. Adding things to Credential Engine, connecting credential transparency to these other initiatives, budget, and I think you can get the rest. Thank you. I don't think I've ever presented where you didn't have to stand up and tell me it was time.
Thank you, Jess. One thing that I really appreciate about the work that's happening in Minnesota is how you're weaving initiatives together. And it's often the case, because I'm a Minnesota resident, that I get a chance to be with folks from Minnesota State and the Governor's Workforce Development Board and to present together to show how the work you're doing, how credential transparency weaves in to allow the state to make data-informed decisions about pathways for students and learners. Last in our mini grant showcase is Ken Sauer from Indiana. And I'm gonna offer a moderator's privilege here, Ken, because I'm gonna give you the remaining time. I know that not only will you tell us about the work happening, but you'll also share with us some of your kind of vision for what the future of this work could look like. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. So first of all, Jillian Schulten, my very talented colleague at the commission, should have been here with me, but last week she came down with COVID, so she's not here. And she's the one who really has done most of the work on this mini grant. Our goals were very simple. They were to add at least 1/3 or perhaps even 1/2 of the 29 Indiana independent institutions to the registry. We had long ago published all 3,000 credentials or so from offered in the public sector. And we did have some outreach to the independent institutions, but for various reasons, we never got very far. In fact, we only had 2 of the 29 independent institutions on the registry. We have very limited statutory authority relative to the independent institutions, so it was more volunteer effort. So we wanted to add 1/3 to 1/2 of the independent institutions. And also we wanted to make special outreach to several independent institutions that either in one case was a primarily Black serving institution, 2 other cases primarily Hispanic serving institutions, and there were a couple of other institutions that had significant outreach efforts to underserved populations. So we have a special target toward those institutions. The key strategies that we pursued, we wanted to leverage an existing strategy, which was to utilize our new school finder tool to demonstrate value to these institutions for publishing to the registry. And part of the strategy there, because of what I just said, was a shift to reach out to the enrollment managers. So let me back up for a second, and you'll see a few slides that will demonstrate what this school finder tool does. But we had a school finder tool before that the commission had developed, and it was tied to a static list of programs at each one of the public institutions. And actually the independent institutions are on that as well. But so you could ask a few questions about what you're interested in, and you would be taken to the institution's website, not the program's website, but the institution's website. So this presented an opportunity for us to tie everything to the registry. And that's exactly what we did. And I'll show you some additional information that's available through the school finder tool. But because of the value that we would demonstrate to the institutions, and by the way, what that value is that they have analytics that they have access to, which will inform them about the kinds of programs that students are searching for. And in addition, the school finder tool has the ability for the student to indicate to the institution whose program is being looked at to share their contact information. So previously, we had reached out to the academic officers and tried to get them involved. But because we were leveraging the development of this new school finder tool, we discovered a new audience that we could reach out to that would see some real value in this. So, and by the way, we've had good progress so far. So we've already added 4 independent institutions. We have 4 more that are very much in the works. So I think we could very well get that stretch goal before the end of the year of half of the independent institutions on the registry. So this is sort of the landing page for the school finder tool. Notice that In the upper center part of this, you'll see Learn More Indiana. This is a very extensive outreach effort that we have to students beginning with 7th grade students throughout the state. And we have an outreach team, which also helps in recruiting students, answering questions, and so forth. So one of the, and I won't go through all the features, but one of the features of this School Finder tool is that through these tiles, one can search different programs and then immediately get information about those and compare them on key variables. If Jillian was here, she'd be able to tell me exactly how she generated the particular tiles that you see here. But in any case, you see that there are 3 programs, the first row, 2 from Indiana University, 1 from Purdue. And you'll see there's some basic information about the institution. By the way, one of the things that the institutions can do is to put pictures and have testimonials that students can immediately see when they begin to see that a particular institution offers a program that they're interested in. You'll note in the lower right-hand part of the screen, we have the earnings data. Kansas was the first state to put the return on investment published to the registry. We're the second, I think. And in any case, that information is available. You'll notice also that to the left, you'll see the cost of the institution. We put that there. And you'll notice too, just above that, there is a price calculator and ways to pay for college. The commission runs the state financial aid program. This will get that student to the different programs that the commission offers. By the way, I mentioned that previously School Finder tool had just the static inventory, and now it points to the registry and the wealth of information that is available. We also have another tool that is licensed by our Department of Workforce Development. It's called Career Explorer. And as the name suggests, it allows students to look at different careers, catalog their interests, catalog their some tools that can help them identify their abilities. And then when they're ready to make a search of programs that can lead them to their career goals, that part of this tool will point to the registry. So we have consistent information that is being presented to students. In the case of this other tool that I mentioned, Career Explorer, there are some hundreds of thousands of views every year. It's really geared for anybody from middle school kids to displaced adults. Again, we're using the registry to provide a wealth of information to a more complex career-oriented tool, as well as a simpler but yet very valuable tool in the case of School Finder. And we certainly intend to refine the School Finder tool. We'll probably build some money into a line item appropriation we have to support transfer and technology. And through this outreach team that I mentioned that fans out throughout the state, we'll be able to get feedback as they engage with communities. Because I think it's Mike, to your question earlier, I think it's so important. We can build these great tools, publish a wealth of data, but if we're not presenting it in ways that the learners can benefit from, and if we're not being proactive to help learners take advantage of those, and to work with our broadband offices at the state level to make sure that everybody has access to web-based tools, we're still not doing our job. So it's not enough to publish all this great data to the registry. We've got to do more than that to make sure it can be used by populations that we need to reach. One other thing, Jillian, very talented. So in order to make it
easier for the independent institutions to get on the registry. She developed this simple little guide. Actually, she does most of the heavy lifting, but this is a guide that the enrollment manager can then take a look at and give to the IT team and get the job done. So that's that's an important part of this whole thing as well. And Rachel, thank you for giving me a few more minutes. I won't, unfortunately, be with you here tomorrow. I've got to be at on a panel discussion back in Indianapolis. So I thought I'd just share a few thoughts about where MCTA may go. First of all, something I think it was Blake who said this, but in Kansas, again, you have an API which enables data at the state level, a database to be published to the registry. We don't have that in Indiana yet. We and in coordinating boards, and I think this may be true for governing boards too, but I know it's certainly true for coordinating boards like Indiana. You have a very unique state unit level, unit record level database, and it has a unique configuration. We're going through a big redesign of that, which thankfully is coming to the end very shortly, and that prevented us from developing an API because we didn't want to develop the application program interface with the old system. We wanted to do it with the new. So hopefully we will join Kansas as one of those states that has an API that can keep most of the data that we collect at the commission current on the registry. Let's see, so that's one thing. But there's, in talking about APIs, and this was actually the subject of one of the breakout groups, it's one thing to talk about a state level, a state agency, unique software system, and how one develops an application program interface to the registry. There are other APIs that we need to develop for the software that vendors that we all at the state level and or the institutional level use. And I don't want to repeat the rich discussion that occurred in the one breakout group, but just to summarize it, I think this is where MHEC can be very effective in working with states, with institutions to identify software that is really critical in terms of updating, publishing, and updating information to the registry. And if we can work together to find software systems that are used in many states by many institutions, and we can then put some pressure either on those vendors to make it easier to publish data to the registry, or else let's find some vendors that already have that capability and go about the business, painful though that may be, of switching vendors in order to make sure, to make it more efficient and effective in publishing our data to the registry. So that's sort of another thing that we need to work on, these APIs, which, and MHEC has a great history of developing master contracts with vendors. Many of you may know of the master contract that MHEC has with Parchment, which is used in 4 or 5 states. Indiana, we have a statewide contract for Parchment, both at the high school to college level, and now we're building out college to college. And the nice thing about the Parchment contract, and this will be a lead into my last point. So Parchment, great vendor, saves us money, but they have also been very responsive in developing capabilities as part of their suite of products, which could fit very well into building a digital credential infrastructure. I'm really referring to, in addition to the basic exchange of academic transcript, I'm referring to their award product, which is a digital credential, which is a digital representation of the diploma that the individual would receive. Now, that's nice. It's nice to be able to publish the digital credential on the graduate can publish it to their social media. They can also send it as a verified credential to a prospective employer, so that they can lose no time in saying, yes, I really did earn this degree. Here it is. You have the proof. But the thing that I'm really getting around to, and brings us back to Credential Engine, is that in addition to having the digital credential that can be sent to an employer or anybody else as a verified credential, it also has a navigation link to the credential registry. So the recipient of the digital credential, the employer who maybe hasn't heard of the college or hasn't heard of the program, they know the college but not the program, through this navigation link, through the award product, they are able to access information that on the registry. Ivy Tech Community College, or statewide community college, the only one, by the way, that is in the country that's accredited as a single institution, which makes it enormously easier to publish transfer information because it applies throughout the state. But Ivy Tech licenses the award product. So every graduate of Ivy Tech now is able to receive a digital credential and do what I said. So they can send it to an employer, and the employer can find out information about the college and about the program. And this really leads to my final point, and this is something that Scott very briefly touched upon in his opening remarks. And that is, and this is really looking to the future and adding even more value to the work that we're doing with Credential Engine. He mentioned the National Governors Association, LER, the Learning and Employment Record Community of Practice. There were 12 states that participated in that community of practice. In the Midwest, it was Indiana and North Dakota. The NGA has invited those states to submit proposals for a grant. And so we're awaiting news, anxiously awaiting news on whether we received one of those implementation grants or not. But what this is all about is, having a learning and employment record that can store a lot of digital information about the credentials the student, the learner has earned, and putting that in what I would call a digital wallet. So we've been talking about the array of credentials that are available from not only traditional colleges and universities, but non-traditional providers, Goodwill, which has a number of Excel centers in different states, and coding camps, and all of that part of the credentialing universe. Think of the individual who will get a certificate from a technical college, an associate degree from a community college, a bachelor's degree from a university, pick up industry and professional certifications along the way. There may be other certificates that they earn. Apprenticeships, a kind of credential, could be included as well. Think of the individual who has 20 of these things from 20 different providers. The idea of the digital wallet is to enable the individual to have all of those digital credentials or links to digital credentials. That's an aspect that's still being figured out in all of this innovative new work. But that's where a credential engine and digital credentials come into play. Because the idea, let's just think of the digital wallet that will contain digital credentials like what I just described for Parchment. In that digital wallet that the individual can then manage, curate with respect to what they include, or a credential gets old, they don't include it anymore in the wallet. And for a particular position, they may choose out of these 20 credentials to send 10 of them to the employer. Well, it's very easy then if they have these in the wallet to then check off the ones you want to send to that employer, so the employer can see the various credentials that one has. And then in the spirit of what I said about the Parchment Award product, if the digital credential has a link, a navigation link back to the registry, the wealth of information that we all have been publishing to the registry would be available to that prospective employer. So to me, I think this is the real vision for the future, the real scenario that will ultimately provide even more value to all of the work that we're doing with Credential Engine. And I think, by the way, in Indiana, working with Western Governors University with some funding that came from the Lilly Endowment initially and then Walmart, there's actually a prototypical digital wallet. Although, while Western Governors University was involved in developing what we call the Indiana Achievement Wallet, this could be the basic technology there could be utilized by anyone and branded accordingly. So I guess I'd like to leave you with these thoughts. I wish I could be here tomorrow to engage further in these conversations, because while I've had a long career, the white hair or no hair, very little hair. I think this is really the most exciting work that I've been privileged to be a part of. And we're very fortunate in the Midwest to have MHEC as a way in which to have this assembly of states to work together and learn from one another. There are so many good things, I think, happening in different states. No state is going to have all the answers. This is a great opportunity to learn from one another and advance this wonderful work. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Ken. You are spot on. It's 5:15.
Purely by accident.
That's all right. Well, I'm just amazed, and I wrote down tons of questions, even though there wasn't time for questions. I'll ask you all individually about the great work you're doing with your mini grants. And I thank you, Ken, for bringing up the connection with learner records, because some of you might have been part of the work we've done over the last couple of years with comprehensive learner records and figuring out what those might look like and figuring out how that ties to the credentials. I mean, it's just so exciting. This is the type of work that's going to help folks looking at entering or re-entering an educational opportunity and setting, and those who have exited or temporarily stepped away, that they need to document it. They need to keep track of it. Just that, when we think about barriers for folks, making sure that you can keep track of this stuff and track it back down. So this all connects. It's all great. We will be able to trade more stories and more successes tonight at dinner. So you have some time on your hands, and at 6 o'clock we'll meet in the lobby of the Aloft, and we will walk over to Joe's Live, which is where we're having dinner and a reception, and we're just going to relax and enjoy ourselves and continue to build these connections. So thank you all for a wonderful first day.